Welcome to the Udyog Manthan's 20th webinar on the topic Communication Services. Udyog Manthan, an initiative by DPIIT under Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India, in association with Quality Council of India, National Productivity Council, and industry chambers, is a marathon of focused sector-specific webinars for promoting quality and productivity in Indian industry. The deliberations today will follow a set of structure, starting with setting up of the context by the line ministry and then the discussion by the panelists. This will be followed by a few questions from the audience. I would request speakers to switch on their video while they speak and all the participants to keep their mic cameras off to avoid any sort of disruptions. You can post your questions in the chat window, which will be taken up by the moderator later during the Q&A session. India is the world's second largest telecommunications market with a subscriber base of 1.16 billion and has registered strong growth in the last decade. Strong policy support from the government has been crucial to the sector's development. The development of the telecom sector of India has experienced a major process of transformation in terms of its growth, technological content, and market structure in the last decade through policy reforms introduced by the Government of India. The sector undergone a dramatic transformation from the government monopoly to a competitive environment after liberalization, where multiple private players could enter and started giving services to customers. Today, we are very grateful to have with us Srimati Deepa Tyagi ji, Senior DDG and Head Telecom Engineering Center, Department of Telecommunication, Government of India, to set the context for the webinar. Srimati Deepa Tyagi ji, an alumnus of IIT Roorkee and MTI Gurgaon and belonging to the Indian Telecom Services, Batch 83, has rich and diverse experience in the field of mobile communications, fixed broadband networks, and setting of telecom standards. As among the earliest officer to be posted on deputation to BBNL for India's flagship project, BharatNet, she is responsible for conception, design, development, implementation of data communications network for the monitoring of the PON equipment installed in the Gram Panchayats. As DDG in tech, she stayed two ITU national working groups, namely NWG12 on QoS QoE and NWG16 on multimedia and AI for health. Prior to her present position, she headed the DOTS National Telecom Institute for Policy Research and Innovation and Training. In her present capacity as Senior DDG and Head Tech, her primary focus is on mandatory testing for certification of telecom equipments to ensure safe and secure quality products in the Indian telecom networks. We welcome you, ma'am. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Shruti, for those kind words. A very good morning to all the participants in today's Udyog Manthan, centering around the Indian telecom sector. It is my proud privilege and indeed a great pleasure to be here as a keynote speaker in this important event organized by the Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, in association with Quality Council of India, QCI, National Productivity Council, NPC, and industry chambers, for promoting quality and productivity in Indian industry. Samudra Manthan is one of the best known episodes in our philosophy that explains the origin of Amrit, the holy nectar. Drawing an analogy from Samudra Manthan, I am sure our Udyog Manthan today would also result in a dialogue aimed at separating the wish from Amrit and helping in reducing the compliance burden on businesses, make our processes of compliance more efficient and user-friendly, a robust test and certification infrastructure, and agile and alert surveillance system, thereby on the whole resulting in promoting quality and productivity in the Indian telecom sector. I represent Telecom Engineering Center, TE, formally called, the technology arm of the Department of Telecom, which is the standards setting organization for telecom sector, responsible for test and certification of products, both under voluntary testing schemes as well as mandatory testing schemes referred to as MTCTE, mandatory testing and certification of telecom equipment. We also participate in international standard bodies like ITU, and we have recently adopted the national as a national standard, the 1M2M standards for M2M communication transposed by TSDSI. This will go a long way in making our smart cities more cost effective and more standards based. In addition, TC is also the designated national inquiry point for WTO, TBT, Technical Barrier to Trade for telecom sector. TC is also the complaint resolution for local content under PPP, Preference to Make in India policy. Under the voluntary testing schemes, we have type approvals against generic requirements. We have interface approvals against interface requirements. We have technology approvals for indigenous technologies by government organizations, R&D institutes, and government labs. And then we also grant approvals against vendors' own specifications. These tests are done through the 4 regional telecom engineering centers that we have in the 4 corners of the country. Coming to the more recent mandatory testing scheme, we issue a certificate of approval against the essential requirements. This testing is done in the TC designated CABs, or the conformance assessment bodies as they are called. And it is only after they have got the certificate that they are allowed to be installed in the country and used in the country. Now, I would just like to throw a little more light on the MTCTE, what was the driving force behind that? So, in the absence of any technical regulations, technological advancements in telecommunications made national security and user safety vulnerable. So, to ensure that any telecom equipment does not degrade performance of existing networks, the CT came into existence through a modification in the Indian Telegraph Rules in September 2017. All telecom equipment shall undergo mandatory testing and certification prior to sale, import, or use in India. Of course, the objectives of MTCT are that they should not degrade the performance of the network to which they are connected. There should not be any security threat, safety of end users, protection of users and public from radio frequency emissions, and compliance with relevant technical regulations. Of course, the certification is for a period of 5 years, and the testing is done through TC designated CABs. And there are 2 different kinds of schemes. One is the simplified certification scheme, or the self certification. And the second is the general certification scheme, whereby the test reports are to be uploaded. For the time being, we are also accepting test reports from any ILAC accredited lab for the technical specifications due to non-availability of adequate testing infrastructure in the country. And of course, there are certain kinds of equipment which are exempted under MTCT. Now, these MTCT testings are done against a document which we call as essential requirements. These details can all be had on the MTCTE portal that is fully functional, and the specifications are broadly drawn around 5 basic headings, namely safety, EMI, EMC, technical requirements, other requirements like SAR, IPv6, etc., and then security requirements. Now, currently, the security requirements are being handled by another organization under DOT, which is NCCS, which is based out of Bangalore. And the rest of the technical specifications are being drawn by a telecom engineering center. And we have a fairly laid out process of wide scale public consultation. And it's only after these consultations that we finalize these documents. Of course, till date, we have finalized essential requirements of about 40 products, and they're all available on the MTCT portal. And as of now, only some of these products have been notified, thereby meaning that these products have to be necessarily tested and approved before they can be used or they can be allowed entry into the country. The list is, of course, available on the website. We are also trying to map the harmonized system of nomenclature, which is used by the Ministry of Commerce. In fact, this is the nomenclature which is used across the world. This is a 6-digit code, which is understood by all the OEMs across the world. So we are in the process of mapping these 40 documents that we have loaded on the website against the respective HSN codes. So which will make life easy for the product vendors. So having said that, of course, we have, I mean, there are a lot of challenges which we are still working on. Like, for instance, ERs, to have a more transparent process, we have begun to upload these ERs on the WTO portal, because as part of the WTO TBT inquiry point, all the regulations have to be notified. So just like we are getting all the notifications from other countries, we have also uploaded these essential requirements so that in case there is any issue or any representation, we can look into that and the issues can be handled. Similarly, this MTCT portal is also in the process of being integrated with the IceGate portal of CBEC. Then we are also ensuring that the whole lot of labs that we have accredited till date, they become transparent vis-a-vis their testing fees, and we have requested them to put their testing fees publicly displayed on their website so that it becomes easier for the OEMs to choose. Similarly, the cab registration or the registration by the interested cabs should also be possible online through the MTCT portal, which is currently manual, but we are on the job and we would like to make it also online. Then there are a lot of new challenges on account of technology changes that we are witnessing. Increasingly, more and more products are cloud based or they are software based. So testing mechanisms would have to be devised accordingly. So these are some of the challenges which we are addressing, and we are in touch with all the vendors and we've been constantly discussing with them, and some policy guidelines are likely soon on these points. And out of the 40 essential requirements that we have released, we have only not notified some of them, and the rest would also follow soon. So I'm sure things will go a long way in ensuring secure and products in the country. And having said that, I would now appeal to all the participants today to please start. I mean, I have set the ball rolling, and I'm sure with a proactive industry and a supportive and receptive government, this sector will only go from strength to strength. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your opening remarks and valuable insight. I would now like to introduce our moderator for today's session, P. Balaji, Chief Regulatory and Corporate Affairs Officer, Vodafone Idea Limited. He has been a pioneer in the telecom sector with rich experience of over 30 years. Mr. Balaji is the chairman of ESOCAM, National Digital Communications Council, and member of National Council of Apex Industries Chambers, CII, FICCI, ESOCAM, and All India Management Association. We welcome you, sir. You may take over from here.
So much for the generous introduction. I think we're really fortunate that we had Deepa ma'am actually set the tone with her keynote and giving the government perspective. And equally, we are blessed, as she said, this is a manthan of great industry stalwarts and leaders who are on the panel. I would not take more time, but basically get down to the the job of making sure that I get some questions that are relevant for the session today to these eminent speakers, and we take it from there, including the question answers which you might want to pose to them later. So maybe I'll start first with Lieutenant General Dr. S.P. Kochar, who is the Director General of COAI, the Cellular Operators Association of India. He is a decorated military and academic veteran and was the first CEO and till recently the CEO of the Telecom Sector Skill Council. General Kocha, maybe we open the session with you by asking a couple of things. You in a way now represent the communication services vertical. So, would just love to hear your views and what you'd like to focus on in the context of today's Manthan. And also if you want to give a couple of takeaways on the quality and productivity in alignment to the broad points that you think are relevant, whether it's spectrum, financial stability, and so on. So the floor is yours to set the ball rolling.
Thank you, Balaji. Thank you so much. And thank you, Deepa ma'am. You've set the ball rolling in the true sense because you said a lot of things that the industry was keen to hear. And I will take on from where you have left. The services industry in the telecom sectors has only one aim, and that is to take quality services at an affordable cost to the subscribers across the country. Now, with that in mind, it is necessary for us to see that while we are giving as much quality as is possible in today's environment at the lowest cost in the world, can this quality improve? The answer in one word is yes. Then what are the requirements in which the quality can improve? So whenever we're talking of quality and when we go to the subscriber, there are two things which are essential. One is reach with the right type of signals, and the second is the quantity of this reach, the capacity of the reach. Now let me take each one of them because each one of them has some amount of impediments that require to be removed. To improve the quality, we have to go to the subscriber with adequate amount of spectrum. And the spectrum can be divided into two parts. One is the excess spectrum and the second is the backhaul spectrum. As far as the excess spectrum is concerned, we are short of excess spectrum, but primarily the government is making it available through auctions, but unfortunately the price is too high, and hence maybe the telcos may not be able to buy as much as they would like to buy. So that is a concern. Going forward, this will continue to be a concern even when 5G comes up. But once we have the spectrum, and even with the existing spectrum and with the onslaught of 5G, the aggregation of data at the access points will become very heavy. And it is already our backhaul network is choking. And there is a requirement of improving these backhaul networks. And the backhaul network can be improved in two manners. 90% of the time, it is to be improved by fiberization. And the fiberization of towers in India is quite poor. Despite the efforts of the central government, despite the efforts, Herculean efforts of the DOT to put fiberization in place, it unfortunately is not taking off in the manner it should have taken off, primarily because telecom falls to some extent in the central jurisdiction, and the center can dictate on that, but in other jurisdictions which are peripheral to telecom, like ROW, etc., it falls in the state jurisdiction, and therefore the prices vary, and hence there is no uniform price despite guidelines from the center. Then there is a requirement of a single window that works across the country in all states. It is there in some, it is not there in others. So that has to be expedited, and fiberization has to come in to improve the backhaul and make it commensurate with whatever is being aggregated at the excess level. Then we will get good quality. In addition to fiber, there is also a requirement in certain geographies of India, India being diverse, where fiber can't reach or is not cost effective to take. And there we require fiber in the air, if I may say so, by using ENV bands. Now these are bands which can carry huge capacities in the backhaul, and the government needs to expedite this, and we have asked the government to auction these so that the license holders can utilize this spectrum in an effective manner. This is going to become more critical as 5G comes in, because these bands are going to be used interchangeably between access and backhaul. And therefore, there is a requirement to take a decision on these matters now. So this is as far as the capacity is concerned. Now, when we reach to the subscriber, we have to reach with adequate signal strength. Now that can be done in two manners. Either we have densification of networks, which means more towers, or we have larger power from the tower being emanated. Now both have to go simultaneously. As far as the power is concerned, it is regulated by government, that the power output is limited to a particular level, which is 1/10 of the level which is prevailing in the world. So the EMF emissions permitted are 1/10 of what is accepted internationally. This may require a relook, because this will definitely improve quality if we go forward with evidence, scientific evidence, that this is not going to harm public health, which is known in our circle but may not be known to the public. And that causes a lot of problem in putting up towers. One problem is a misconception in the mind of people who want good quality, but in the neighborhood they don't permit us to put up towers. Now that is a dichotomous situation, and which we are jointly addressing. We are going and trying to educate people along with TRAI, and we hope that we get this thing sorted out. More acute than this is the unnecessary fees, high fees which are being put on tower sites. To set up a tower, we have to now pay huge amounts of fees, and this is also causing a lot of concern. Now, the teledensity in the urban area, as we are all aware, is 130%. In the rural area, it is hovering around 50%. Now, therefore, if we have to go along with the Honorable Prime Minister's vision of taking telecom services or the digital services to the common man across the country, obviously the network layout in rural areas has to improve. And in addition to the factors that I mentioned earlier, it also requires massive infusion of funds into network densification in these areas. And therefore, and we also know that the ROI in rural areas is not as good as it is in the urban areas. So therefore, there is a need for the government to now look at empowering telcos to take the networks with requisite quality and at a uniform cost that is prevailing across the country to the rural population also. This is further accentuated by the fact that in COVID we have seen that telecom has now become a foundational sector on which the growth of other sectors depends. And one of the statements which has been made by reliable people is that the earnings of other industry other than telecom will get accentuated by 10 times in case they are empowered by telecom. So that is the type of fillip that the GDP will get in case the telcos can provide the right type of network which is across the country. And for this, government then has to now look what are the impediments which are causing. One, of course, is the regulatory and policy, because like I mentioned earlier, that requires to be looked at and made more smooth and uniform. The second one is a relook at levies. So far, levies and fees and taxes were being levied on telecom as an industry which is vertical. It is no longer vertical. It is now an essential service which is horizontal, which is empowering. And hence, the government has to look at that in that manner and see that the primary revenue that which they may get out of telecom will be far less than the secondary revenue that they get from industries that are getting empowered by telecom. And this is going to increase with Industry 4.0 coming in, with smart cities coming in, with IoT coming in. And like Deepa ma'am said, M2M standards coming in. So obviously IoT is going to increase. And therefore, these issues required to be looked at. The next part is about regulation. The telecom industry is an over-regulated industry, if I may say so. And the corresponding industries which provide similar services like telecom or adjacent services like telecom are not treated in the same manner that telecom is being treated. So that requires uniformity. They have to be brought into a uniform gambit if they're providing the same services, using the same facilities. And they have to be accordingly handled both in policy, in finance, and regulation. We also have been getting support from the government, and we have been in touch with them to make the regulatory touch a little lighter. And fortunately, TRAI does see sense in this, and hopefully going forward, this will speeden up the rollout of networks so that the population can benefit. So, all in all, these are some of the points I think which will benefit the industry, benefit actually the population. That is more important. The user is more important. So, everything that we do, whether it is government or the industry or anybody else, should be for the benefit of the user. And that is what we are attempting to do. Thank you so much, Balaji.
Thank you so much, General Kocher. I think what you said in the end is so appropriate. You've given very good ideas on how we can improve the quality of service for the common citizens and help achieve the government's vision and the Prime Minister's vision of inclusive growth and digital economy. And so, excellent points to kick off this session. I would now move on to the next eminent speaker. That's Dr. Vinosh Babu James, who is a Technical Standards Director of Qualcomm India. He also engages with the Indian and regional stakeholders on matters relating to radio standardization, harmonization, and regulation. Radio in the wireless network is the largest investment that gets made by telecom operators in the network, and obviously it has a huge impact on the quality of services and everything else. But the question to you, Dr. James, there is so much interest around 5G and its application to Industry 4.0. Maybe you can help us understand this better. Explain what are the opportunities that can be tapped in the services center using this, and maybe why is it that it's so important for 5G? I mean, you have 4G already in place, but why is it that this opportunity is best tapped by 5G? Maybe you can just throw a little bit light on that.
Sure. Thank you, Balaji. Good morning to all the participants. I hope I'm audible. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so okay, so Industry 4.0, its applications and why this matters, why 5G. So I'll talk from the standards and technology perspective on how this is actually unique, an opportunity both for the Indian ecosystem to tap and how others will actually take it forward. So let me just try to share a few slides from my end. Just hold on. So this is how you typically industry floor or factory floor is going to be looking like, right? So you are going to be seeing a lot of these automated entities working in the floor. It is going to actually have a different set of requirements. You'll be having people on the floor using equipment to read analytics, basically trying to see what is there in the shop floor today, what is to be converted, what is not, what is there to be scheduled, all those things. Tons of computer vision aided automation happening in here, industrial robotics running on the floor, and the real crux is there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of sensors which will be actually connected to different variation of these equipment. So that's the crux, right? So when we started designing 5G, we begin with this particular assumption. Where do we start? So we had something called as a 4G. And if you look into it in your own life on, what was the expectation way back in like 2011 or so, even in the Western world, the ask was, can I start seeing my email in my mobile? That had changed a lot of activity, right? So there were like three key entities or elements on this ecosystem which actually moved the pace. One was like device makers like us, who was able to come up with good compute platforms which also served as connectivity platforms. There were network service providers like our Bhartis, Vodafone Ideas, and Reliances of the world, who actually rolled out this connectivity fiber available for everyone. And the third element was infrastructure makers who actually made world-class equipment which can actually enable connectivity fabric. So way back in 2010 or that particular time frame, the ask was, can you give broadband connectivity? 10 years later, the ask had been, okay, there are like societal things I need to look on, that I need to give connectivity to everyone. And the other big ask is, after broadband for citizens, what next? So in 5G, it was more like designed to be a unified fabric based on which every other service can run, right? So I explained in this particular thing, how a factory floor look like. I have requirements for ultra reliable low latency things. These are like your sensors which need to pick and place things with very, very high accuracy. Then you have cameras and other head mounted displays, which are like going to be very, very high data rate applications. And then all these sensors, which have like a very different dynamic, saying that, I'm like in the hundreds, I'm not even ones at tens. And then I need to be actually, consuming power so that I live long for like tens of whatever years that's possible. So one technology that needs to address all these requirements. So that's how actually this one evolved. So right from design way back in 2015, when we were doing it, we ensured that, it actually addresses a lot of these things. So why is this going to be an opportunity? It's going to be an opportunity because of what I am actually going to show you, right? So this is basically a study, Qualcomm did with that IHS Economics, trying to find out, where exactly is the opportunity for 5G coming on, other than your traditional broadband service. And out of this study, we basically told out, by 2035, you have a potential to target 5 trillion in terms of moving the economy needle, right? And the target now is, how much of that can be a service which can be serviced from a particular geography or a region, right? And if you look into what's there in the bottom, the most promising entity is the manufacturing sector, right? And that's where, Industry 4.2 actually is going to drive the things, simple things like, let me give an example, your smart grids, right? So if you can actually tap on where the leak is, where you're actually inefficient, and then address that problem, you have actually saved. You're actually improving on a particular vertical. You're actually moving the needle towards the economy needs of a particular country, right? So simple elements. The difference was the connectivity fabric was able to actually address the need of a particular vertical, and they were able to do work on top of it, right? And one of the discussions, which keep coming again and again, where are we in terms of the standards development? Candidly speaking, India is among the most promising and well-equipped country to actually offer services. Uh, we have like big shots like TCS, Wipro, Tech Mahindra, all of them offering software services, connectivity services, telecom services, and several of them are also going into the infrastructure services now, right? So it's a huge opportunity. So how do we actually tap in there? So that's the question which keeps coming. Just on addressing this thing, why we didn't see this in 4G, and then why we are actually seeing it in 5G, and how are you actually seeing this thing evolve? It's a slow process, right? So 5G has just got introduced. So I'm in my gut feeling sees that, you're not going to have a greenfield operator come in again and then start offering 5G only service. So you are going to be having 4G service prevailing for like several more years to come. Operator investment need to be taken back. We are aware of BSNL trying to roll down their own 4G networks. So it's going to take time. 4G still has life. 5G is coming up. There is a need for very high data rate to be provided. Yeah, there is opportunities in like several of these vertical domains which need to be addressed. So those are some of the early things 5G will be actually tapping, right? And why is it actually important? This is important because, maybe like this example we can take. You compare a mobile phone and you also compare a police walkie-talkie, right? So look over years on how these two things evolved, right? So the best thing I remember is the Nokia 1100 model, which was used for phone calls alone. That was like 8 to 10 years back. And now we are using smartphones, which the reality is you can also use it to make a phone call, because you are doing several other things on top of it. The service industry literally leverage the investments made by these three entities, the manufacturers, operators, and the device makers, and then wrote a lot of service on top of it, right? So entities like came up with the OS like iOS and Android, based on which services were put in this particular platform. The walkie-talkie industry, it hasn't evolved over years because it's like a pocketized small confinement thing, right? So all these industry players, the vertical players, they quickly saw it. The way I am able to leverage this particular industry is actually latching onto this cellular ecosystem, reuse modules from in there, and then see how I can actually leverage. You talk about Industry 4.0, the module, the connectivity, the platform, the device, everything is the same. It's just that somebody wrote more services on top of it, and then they took it to the next level. You talk about digital broadcast. How can I actually bring in broadcast services into my mobile? Ensure that you have a technology which sits alongside the model, and you can actually reuse a lot of these aspects. Anything you take in this particular plate, the opportunity for them is to see how to actually tap into the existing telecom cellular ecosystem model and then leverage out of it. I just try to put together, some of those things where Qualcomm was actually involved to say, apart from these handsets, what are all the things, you're actually doing, right? And I could actually see that, Qualcomm already has this connected PC platform. You are talking about routers, customer premise equipments, modules, a lot of these things coming in. You talk to a Ericsson or a Nokia of the world, they will actually bring in a suit which says that, I have these many different variety of network equipment in place. Talk to a Vodafone, Airtel, Jio, they will say that, these are different category of services. So you put them all together, the screen will just, fade away in a quick moment of time, right? So that's the power of this particular platform. And for this industry to survive, or this more verticals to actually leverage the opportunity in here, it's necessary to ensure that, you actually harmonize and then look into the opportunity based on which, this was actually supposed to grow. So adopt global standards, ensure that, you have your ecosystem players coming in and then riding services on top of it. Tap into the global economy, which is like the huge opportunity. I showed like 2 slides earlier. Balaji, if you're okay, I just want to show 2 more slides explaining where we are today with respect to 5G deployments, and then
yeah, a little bit fast, because we are definitely
maybe just 1 second, 1 minute, not more than that.
Thank you.
So this is the current status of 5G deployment, what is actually happening. So if you look into it, our East Asian neighbors, they have actually leveraged these services a lot. Europe is actually taking up faster. A large adoption is happening in North America. India is yet to take up on this 5G picking, but the good point is within 1 year of rollout, there are a huge lot of countries which have taken it, and then a lot of form factors that have actually come. Concluding on my last slide, this is how the technology evolution is actually going to span from now until say what's called a 6G or whatever. I'm mapping it to the 3GPP standards, which is like the single global standard existing today to actually service these opportunities. And if you look into the different releases that is coming in, huge opportunity for innovation, long-term research that can be done until between now and say 2025 or whatever. And then it actually takes into the WRC 27 timeframe when the 6G opportunity will actually begin, right? So huge opportunity for innovation to happen from India, huge potential for service players to come in here. And, engineers like me have actually contributed to develop one particular technology, which ensures that quality of call, quality of service, quality of equipment, everything is guaranteed for the next generation to actually take it. Back to you, Balaji.
So much, Dr. James. I think it was excellent to hear a technocrat's point of view, how the standards are evolving, what the opportunities for India are, the 5 trillion number, the magic number they talked about as the opportunity of 5G, the promise of 5G, and the innovation that will obviously propel the same. Thank you so much. I'll now move over to Mr. Arun Malik, who's the Executive Director of TIA India Hub. He's an experienced professional with over 45 years of service, and he has been in top positions in many organizations, including Airtel, Escotel, Ranbaxy, to name a few. Maybe with your rich experience, Mr. Malik, we can ask you to identify or highlight, are there other industry whose best practices may be used for quality and productivity improvement as far as the telecom sector or the communication industry is concerned? Over to you, Mr. Malik. You're on mute, so you'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay now? Is it okay now? Okay.
Loud and clear.
So, right.
अरुण जी थोड़ा सा आपकी वॉइस फेड हो रही है. Maybe we request you to switch off the. Arun ji, maybe we request you to switch off the video. Maybe clearer.
Okay, I'll do that.
थोड़ा सा unclear है. I think yeah. Now maybe it will be clearer without the video, please.
Yeah. Okay. I think let's see. Well, thanks, Balaji. Thanks for the opportunity. Well, my experience is broadly in the field of automobile, followed by pharmaceutical, followed by telecom. So it's a different kind of experience. At the same time, I am basically a disciple of Professor Ishikawa from Japan, where I learned quality by spending a lot of time with him and industries in Japan. So I made an attempt and found that any kind of industry, the discipline of quality and productivity are similar. I'm now helping out Ayush industry also, in Government of India, Ayush, how to spread in India. I just use this, my slides. Are they visible?
Not yet, Arun ji. Maybe surely visible. I'm sure.
Well, you see, the basic concept which I'm trying to say is that if communication industry, which has been very successful in the last 15 years or more than that, which I've seen, the other industry which has put India on the international map, and I'm suggesting that we benchmark with that, and that's the industry of automobile, and in which I think Atam Bharat as an initiative was taken, to my knowledge, about in 1980 in automobile industry, and where not only the industry but the suppliers to these industry went through a radical change and started providing great services across the world, and they are successful even today also. The other reason I'm suggesting that we pick up automobile as a benchmark, because to my mind automobile is going to be a great customer, and our thought process is quite different in telecommunication than automobile. They talk about ppm, and they are working at 50 part per million in any process, right? I mean, whether it's servicing, whether it's designing a component, or whether it's reliability of what they offer, campaign resolution, response time, etc. And we talk about averages. If we are going to serve automobile as a customer, then we need to change our mindset and understand their language, and and switch over to because we will be able to give quality services only if we understand their language. Average is something which is not going to be acceptable when we offer IoT solutions, when we offer reliability to vehicles, when we offer various services which don't fall in line with the language which they speak. The other thing, the reason I'm saying that we need to benchmark with automobile is because even though we have played a key role in the last few years for success of each industry, whether it's education or software development, delivery of services in automobile, FMCG, healthcare, transportation, M2M, everywhere we played a key role. But still, we have not been successfully able to define processes which will, besides standards of equipment, we have not yet been able to institutionalize a process regime which will ensure consistency in services. I mean, the regulator and the associations have been looking at challenges in a different way. Uh, each has his own perspective and his own script. Whereas when automobile industry was launched in India somewhere in 1980, the CIA as an association and government regulatory bodies and the industry joined hands to develop processes for their suppliers. And not only did develop processes or standards of processes, they also spend money in teaching and educating or guiding suppliers or MSMEs to socialize process discipline. And that's what is paying dividend to automobile industry in India as on date. Today, the companies which started with maybe 2 crores or few lakhs of revenue are working in thousands of crores and are number one suppliers to industry across the world. The challenge is quite similar going to be because we are present across the world. I mean, communication industry is serving to customers of different segments in India as well as across the world. But at the same time, when we look at our quality and productivity, which are to my mind synonyms. I mean, if quality increases, defect will come down, productivity is 99% going to increase. But we are focusing on technology, which is good, which is required. But if there are gaps in processes, then we will not be able to achieve that kind of quality and productivity, which are very few, all our customers, whether machine to machine, in a manufacturing organization will demand, because they will not expect us to deliver on averages. So one, I think we need to recreate that model which was created by automobile industry in 1980 by working of industry association and government regulatory bodies. And such kind of standards are available across the world and have been utilized by communication industry. I think one of my colleagues is going to cover them up. So, which is my strong recommendation that such kind of initiatives need to be identified, designed, and implemented. And we have the existing practice available. We don't have to reinvent the wheels. There are people available. I mean, the associations are doing very well. The government regulatory body is also doing very well. But the focus has to shift on, on not only on price only. We need to reduce cost, but cost optimization has to be achieved by minimizing waste, by reducing the defects, reducing the complaint resolution time. In a mechanical language, they say we have a factory running parallel to the factory, which is doing nothing but reworking or redesigning. Uh, Same concept has been utilized in health industry also. In 1990, healthcare industry, whether it's hospital or it's pharma manufacturing, they were into quality control. Shifting of quality control to quality assurance, they were adopting same practices which Ishikawa had propagated or Toyota had propagated, help them to reduce their cost and also help them to reduce their failure. Of course, it has not come to the level of automobile, but this has been successfully adopted. So my recommendation is that such regulatory bodies and the association should join hand and motivate service providers, motivate others, MSMEs, because MSMEs are going to be very critical with 5G and 6G coming up. The kind of components which they supply and the cost at which they supply, the kind of perfection which these components are provided are going to make a huge difference, not only in the organization, but also country at large. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you, please.
So much, Mr. Malik. I think your experience across industry, as you said, and the relevance of it even today for the communication sector was very, very enlightening. So thank you for your views. I now move on to Mr. Soumitra Vadalkar, founder of 42 Labs, ex-CTO and Global Head of Innovation for TechM, and he's also co-chair of the India chapter of TIA US. And maybe we can ask him the question which goes around telecom quality standards today. Are they adequate to deliver the kind of quality services to end consumer and what more can be done by telecom players in order to make the end consumer delighted with their service. Over to you, Mr. Vadalkar.
So you
Thank you. Sorry. Am I clear now?
Hear you clearly.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you for the opportunity to share my views. What I'm going to do is talk more from the user perspective, though I have been a core part of the industry for over the last 40 years. And I want to tie that with my own experience of progression through the industry, because it's quite critical to see how the industry has evolved. Right? So I actually started my relationship with telecom industry way back in 1980s with C-Dot. So I was core part of the C-Dot team that developed the central module for 10,000 and 100,000 line exchanges. And as part of that, I went through the hoops trying to get the central module certified with TEC. So thank you to TEC. It was a great experience and I learned a lot during that process. And I was also part of the core team that transferred the technology to ITI model plant for the first 3 central modules that were actually produced. Now, that entire process, the focus was on quality and reliability of the product itself, because CDOT was a design and manufacturing of the equipment itself, right, which was relevant. In 1990s, I was part of the core Reliance team. I was one of the first 5 employees in Reliance, and that time there was no Reliance Telecom or anything. It was just Reliance. 1995 to be precise. And I actually designed the entire GSM network for Northeast, entire Northeast, West Bengal, MP, Himachal, etc. And the focus at that point of time was on the coverage and the other related, in my opinion, still quality of experience parameters that were actually part of the agreement that all the telcos signed with the DOT, right? So that was a good move to include those parameters, because at least telcos started focusing on the experience of the user in terms of drop calls, in terms of call connect during first try, etc., etc. Okay. Now, somewhere along the line in the past years, I think the industry has lost that focus on the user and has shifted only to some kind of numbers game. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm being critical, but I'm talking from the user perspective now. And even today, just a few days back, I had to shift my service provider of last more than 20 years, and I'm not going to say who, to a new service provider, hoping that the coverage at my home is adequate enough so I can take some critical calls that come to me at my home, right? Over the last decade, when I was CTO Telecom for Tech Mahindra, I have been interacting with a lot of international operators, and that decade has also seen rapid changes as part of digital transformation across multiple sectors. And telcos world over had, and in my opinion still have, a major opportunity to play a core role in this entire transformation. Okay, but I think they lost it during the last decade to OTT players. Okay, because again the focus on the user was not so much there, and they were still more network centric. And many telcos, international telcos, and even Indian telcos tried to create a separation of the network and the business. And in the sense, like KPN, Verizon, they had separate entities. One entity looking at the network infrastructure, focusing on the reliability and the quality of the network that was offered to the business players. And there was a separate business entity focusing on just providing not just business to consumers, but also business to other enterprises like B2B, right? And start of focusing more on the quality of experience of those business entities and consumers. Okay, still I think that wasn't enough, and the OTT players have still gained share, and to the extent where the telcos are in the danger of becoming irrelevant. So if I have a good Wi-Fi coverage from a non-telco player today at my home, in cafes that I visit, in restaurants, and in the office, I really don't need a telco, right? And many youngsters today don't want SIM cards. They say, I want Wi-Fi, that's all, okay? and you can do calls on Wi-Fi, you can do video on Wi-Fi, you can do everything on Wi-Fi. Okay, so Wi-Fi is becoming in a way disruption, and which will come in 5G. I'll talk a little bit, but there are other experts that are going to talk about 5G. As chairperson of the India chapter of TIA Quest Forum over the past few years, I have approached many telcos in India, all the major telcos, talking about TL 9000 standard. Okay, and believe me, it's an excellent tool to measure the network quality and compare yourself with the world's best in terms of benchmarking, and it provides clear measurements where you can see where you stand. Okay, but it is still related to the relationship between the telco and the vendor, network equipment provider, right? That is the relationship that these standards handles in the major way. The relationship between telco and the end user in terms of quality of experience is still not that adequately handled. And that was a feedback that we received from many telcos saying, can you help us benchmark us with respect to the global telcos, where we stand in terms of quality of experience of the end user. Okay, and that is the focus that I've been trying to bring in the the board discussions of TIA and Quest Forum, how to create or make TL 9000 more user focused and bring in measurements of the user into this domain. And as part of that, TIA also has now a tool, excellent tool, that helps telcos measure the quality of experience of the end user and create those measurements and also help them benchmark. Okay, but unfortunately in India I haven't seen many people taking that up, maybe because of more effort required or more cost and all that. But I think that is the area that needs to be focused on. So in the ultimate analysis, my recommendation would be to strengthen the regulation and the standards, both sides, to benchmark quality of experience, measure and benchmark quality of experience of the end user. Okay, and that is going to become extremely critical. Okay, so also encourage telcos to move to new technologies. So you have, as part of digital transformation, you have AI, machine learning, AR, VR, all these technologies coming in, analytics, deep big data analytics. And believe me, telcos hold the maximum data of all the users than anybody else. Okay, but I have not seen, and I worked with many telcos in TechM, somehow they have not been able to leverage that data, keeping in mind the privacy, of course, analyze the user behaviors and the user experience and bring it to bear on improving the quality. Hasn't happened. Okay, so telcos need to move there, and they will move once the regulation is in place and once there is also such tools are made available by the vendors around. Okay, so instead of focusing just on the network equipment, okay, which is required, I'm not saying not required, but the equipment quality has been improving over past so many years because the semiconductor quality has improved, the software quality has improved. So the network quality is kind of taken for granted now. Okay, and there are tools that will kind of do the analysis quickly and help you restore from the fault also. Okay, so the focus of both standards and regulation needs to shift into more of a quality of user experience. Okay, and when we are talking about 5G, that is the most critical aspect that's going to become, because you're talking about low latency services. I think the Qualcomm expert talked about it. Low latency services such as automatic self-driving becomes very critical. You can't break connection or you can't drop anything, right? Also in case of medical, where you're talking about online diagnostics or even in some cases online surgery, extremely critical services, right? So quality of experience, measurement and benchmarking for all the communication players is now extremely critical. So from the standards perspective, we'll keep pushing for the standards to go in that direction, but also from the regulation perspective, that needs to happen. And I think all the major communication players, not just telcos, so people who give me at home, for example, cable and Wi-Fi, okay, now there is a optical fiber that comes in which goes over the trees and all that, which is in my opinion not right. So all the communication players that provide any kind of communication need to be brought under the same umbrella of regulation in terms of quality and other regulatory requirements, right?
May
So
I
that
request
would be my
Mr.
recommendation.
Valkar, if you can just
I'm
finish a
done.
little bit rapidly. We have 5 more
No,
speakers.
I'm done. that was my recommendation in terms of bringing everybody together in terms of quality of end user experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that last recommendation is good. From your rich experience from manufacturing to services, I think you've brought a very good perspective and recommendation to us. So thank you, Mr. Vidalkar. May I just now move on to Mr. Vimal Vyas, who is Director for Customer Experience and Excellence with Orange Business Services. Again, an extremely experienced professional in the area of customer experience, business excellence, transformation, and quality. So, great addition of this panel. Mr. Vyas, in this rapidly evolving 4.0 industry revolution, where do you see the changes? How do you see the changes in customer experience and employee experience landscape, particularly from the quality and productivity point of view?
Thank you, Balaji, and good afternoon, everyone on the panel and those who have joined this call today. Privileged to be part of this, extremely empowered and experienced panel. So I would like to answer this by quoting, a couple of anecdotes, and I'm sure we all will be able to relate, those who are in the industry from last a decade or more than that. Uh, the rules of engagement that any telco used to had, I'm talking about B2B engagement typically, is that if I go back in, let's say, 2005, 2007, service manager used to go ahead and meet the customer along with his service level analysis and report, right? And service manager used to quote to say that, look, our agreement is of 98.5 or 99.5% of uptime, and we have met the SLA this month, so it's a time for celebration. I think that was the discussion that used to happen. On the other side, customer was never used to be so happy because those remaining 0.5% of downtime, which contributes to, let's say, 30 minutes or 40 minutes, at that time would have significantly impacted his business. But I think we had those SLAs which were there in place, and we were able to convince the customer that everything is all good, right? Uh, there is one more example that I just want to quote. We have Lieutenant Colonel Yashpal, who is there on the call with us today, and one of the speaker as well. I personally know him from last almost 15 years, and he's a prominent auditor in TL 9000 space. And I have personally been part of his audit while representing various telcos. Um, so there is this measurement clause, in TL 9000, which talks about defining the severity. And unfortunately, I used to have, difference of opinion with him in last decade while he was the auditor, with all due respect. But there was this clause where he was always saying that, how are you defining the severity for your customers, which we call it as major, minor, or P1, P2, based on the your own nomenclature. And we used to say that if there is a service disruption, if the link is completely down, it's major or priority 1 for us, and if there is a degradation, is P2. And he always used to give this non-conformity, which later on he used to kind of strike it off in all my interaction, to say that, who are you to define service disruption for customer? Which means you are saying that there is a service degradation, and therefore this particular incident should be P2. But according to customer, if there is a significant impact on the business, then it has to be P1. And I at that time, probably I was not able to complement what he was trying to convince all the telcos. But I think now I'm able to relate it very well, because that's what customers are demanding right now. So if I talk about the change in the customer experience and how we can relate this to quality and productivity, and my recommendation, I think there is a time for us to redefine the way we are talking about agreements, SLAs, and service quality. Gone are those days where we were looking at the standard KPIs and SLAs, and we used to publish this to our customers. Every customer is unique, and therefore there cannot be standard SLAs and agreement, right? We need to actually understand the customer environment, business, and then we need to redefine the SLAs and agreement. So one recommendation is that there is a need to relook at the way we are defining the agreement and SLAs for our customers. And this is absolutely necessary, because in B2B space, there is nothing called as B2B anymore, right? It's all about B2B2C, which means uh, business is not bothered about what you are giving as an uptime, etc. Business is bothered about that their end customers, how are they experiencing the service that is offered by the telcos, and therefore this whole rules of engagement is getting changed. And I think that's one of the recommendation on the customer experience base. The second recommendation I would like to mention, and I think Mr. Vadalkar touched upon it very well, is redefining the service quality. One of the requirement of any standard, be it TL9000 or anything else, is all about customer satisfaction survey, capturing those feedback, and then sharing some plan whatever you have improved upon. But I think now the need is that, are you able to measure what end user is experiencing from the service quality point of view? And I think that's something that we started practicing in our business services, is that we don't just measure what our direct customers are talking, giving us as a feedback. We go one step ahead. We actually talk to their end customers, users, and we take their feedback into consideration, which is helping us to redefine our products, service, and offerings, from the design thinking point of view, to ensure that what is the perception of the end user who is using the service. And I think that's the need of an hour. The second recommendation is to redefine the service quality and ensuring that how do you bring the end user, in the entire framework from the standard and benchmarking point of view as well. And the third and the last one, from the customer experience point of view, is to redefine the rules of engagement. And why this is important is that in today's era, I think for any customers, whether you and I as an end user for likes of Amazon or Uber, I think less is more. And I think that's what is coming out very clearly, even in B2B space, which means the less your customer is going to interact with you during the run phase or build phase, the more successful you are as a telco. Are you able to empower your customers during the build phase? Are you able to provide regular updates in a real-time basis to all your customers once there is a disruption in the service? Do they have all tools and reporting that is required, and they technically don't need service management at all? Everything is at the fingertips. So I think the less your presence in customer life cycle in their journey, the more successful you are. So the third recommendation is, how do we redefine our rules of engagement with our customers by including the new age technologies and tools to make sure that your customers don't have to interact with you much, less of the disruption, and therefore a better customer experience. So to sum it up, I think my three recommendations on the experience front: redefining the agreement and SLAs, the way we are actually defining and looking at it. Second one is, look at the service quality from the end user point of view and make sure that you include them in the standards as well, and the way you are measuring your satisfaction. And the third one is redefining the rules of engagement with your customers. The less is the more should be the focus area. Moving on to the last point, which is on the employee experience, which is the second part of the question that is asked to me. Um, Again, I want to give an example. L1, if we talk about in any service industry, typically in the telcos, the traditional role of L1 or L2, when the service is down, was to connect with the customer through voice or email, capture all the details, and then go ahead in your trouble ticketing tool, open the incident, and share it with your customers. I think that was the role of the L1. What used to happen after that? It used to go to L2, level 2, and level 2 used to do some preliminary checks and then try to do a bit of diagnostic actions, etc. Now the scenarios have completely changed. I think there is no need of L1 at all in the industry. If you see, like if I again give example of Orange, more than 90% of incidents are proactive in nature, which means you don't need anybody to open the incident for you. What we have also done, and I'm sure most of the telcos have also done, is that we are also putting in place a lot of machine learning and AI, by which once the incident is booked proactively, there is this bots and machine learning in place, which will do proactive diagnostics for you and give you all possible results. That's what's wrong, what's right, or where is it that you need to focus on. Therefore, the role of L2 has also diluted, right? And you already getting those recommendations straight away. Not only that, in some of the services, there is something called as auto hill, which means the automation is taking control of even L2 and L3 and doing auto hill and fixing these issues. So therefore, if I talk from the employee experience point of view, there is a clear need of value chain enhancement. We need to go back and look at our job descriptions that we would have defined, in our own organizations, and see that how can we focus on the lower part of the pyramid and redefining the job descriptions to make sure that we are able to bring them into up into value chain and make sure that they are able to contribute much more than what they have been doing until about now. So there is a clear need of value chain enhancement in the employee experience point of view. Again, how are we doing this currently? To give you an example, let's say in the problem management space, which is one of the fundamental thing that you do in telco as well. We have completely automated this whole exercise, which means the problem managers, a manager who we used to hire 8 to 10 years of experience, expert in incident management and other root cause analysis, etc. Now his job is very simple. There is automation in place which will actually find out the trends, pattern, come back with the recommendation and give this on a platter to problem manager. His expectation is to go one step ahead and fix those things straight away, and also try to be a little more preemptive in engaging with the customer and do some additional recommendation. So value chain enhancement becomes the one of the fundamental aspect of the employee engagement. And the second and the last, which is the most important part, is empathy. I think I was giving a lot of example that how AI, ML, and bots are taking over almost all the roles that we have. One of the fundamental difference that
We'll have to wrap
we're
up
able to
soon.
distribute, is the empathy in place. So I think the second critical quality that we should focus on in the industry from the employee experience point of view to meet up those requirements in the customer experience is to ensure that how do we focus more on the empathy and build those as a part of DNA to all our employees. So I think these are my recommendations on experience for customer experience point of view and employee experience point of view. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vyas. I think your talk on disruption on multiple fronts from the customer and the employee perspective on improving quality and turnaround time is fantastic. And the way you've actually given a segue to the next speaker when you spoke about the TL 9000 framework. So we have Lieutenant Colonel Yashpal, who's a telecom advisor with BSI India, and he's a lead auditor, trainer and consultant for ISO 9000, TL 9000, ISO 27001, and ISO 22301. And he's only one of 9 master trainers in the world for TL 9000 who are accredited by TIA. So, Colonel Yashpal, question to you. How the worldwide adopted quality management system of TL 9000 applicable and specific to companies doing business in the telecom domain? And how can it actually help Indian companies to improve the quality of their products and services and also contribute to greater productivity? Over to you, Colonel Yashpal.
Thank you, Mr. Balaji. Can all of you hear me, please?
Yes, sir.
So, some slide, just tell me if I can properly share it. If it is not, then I will speak just like that. So, can you see the slides, please?
Not yet. Yeah, now we can. Now we can, Colonel Yashpal. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, right. So, right. So, this is on the paper. So, I think most of it, Balaji has already given the introduction, so I'll skip this. Now, there was a talk about TL 9000 by Raju Vadalkar, and I think Vimal also covered this. There are very few people who know about this standard. Actually, when we talk about this quality management system in telecom sector, most of the people think that it is probably ISO 9001. No, there is a standard which is a quality management system which is exclusively for telecom, or for those companies, I'll put it this way, who are doing business in telecom domain, be it service providers or hardware manufacturers or software providers. In fact, if somebody is providing logistics services in telecom domain, TL 9000 is applicable to him. So, or applicable to that company. Now, how does it came into being? It was in late 90s, around 1998, that most of the leading telecom companies of the world, they came together and they formed a forum called Quest Forum. Quest stands for Quality Excellence for Suppliers of Telecommunication. Now this Quest Forum has merged with TIA, that is Telecom Industry Association, and now the present name is TIA. Now, apart from the mandate to look after solutions for other problems of the telecom world, they also decided that we should have a specific quality management system, which is primarily meant for telecom domain, rather than taking help of ISO 9001, which is applicable to any organization till the time that organization has. So it is equally applicable to, let's say, a petrol pump, or let's say a somebody running a fishery business, or to a telco. So rather than having one size fit all, they decided that we should have something which addresses our requirements of a quality management system. And they created two work groups. One is technical work group and the other is oversight work group. These work groups are still existing. So they went about it in the most, in my opinion, simple and very effective way. And that was that all these companies, I think at that time, there were about 30, 40 of them. Now I think 500 companies are member of Quest Forum and TIA. So they decided that, look, if we are the leading companies in the world of telecom, there must be something good about us. So they thought of bringing all their good business practices on the table, and they discussed all of them, selected 90 of them, added those 90s to already existing ISO 9001, and voila, we had TL 9000. So TL 9000 actually is ISO 9001 plus good business practices of the companies the world over. Now, I said that it was, this is the history, but after that, these work groups were not banned. So the Quest Forum had a system, and still it is in vogue, that they ask for inputs from anybody. I mean, any organization. It may be part of TIA. It may not be part of TIA. The word used is user of the handbook. So handbooks means the requirement handbooks and the measurement handbook. Any organization, any person who has gone through this standard, if he feels, or if the organization feels that something is good for or better for the telecom world, they can put a suggestion to the Quest Forum. These work groups, they meet every 6 months, discuss all the suggestions, and also input from the research which goes on the measurement data. I think Raju Vadalkar talked about measurements. So as part of certification, every company has to submit certain data regarding measurements, which are customer centric. So there is a lot of research goes on in University of Texas in Dallas. There are about 60, 70 people over there who do a research work on that, and the inputs come from them also to these work groups. And this standard is kept up to date. As late as possible, the changes have come in April 2020. In fact, those 90 adders which were there, they are now actually reduced, modified to 84. Now, what are these? What are the goals of TL 9000? Why was it created by Quest Forum? Now, the first aim was that before this TL 9000, there were multiple standards which were applicable to, as I said, to any company, including the telcos. The first one, of course, the QMS was ISO 9001, the most popular one, but it was applicable to everyone. Similarly, there was for software, there was CMMI, there was some information security management systems, and plenty others. So the idea was that let's have one set of requirements or one set of quality requirements which should be applicable and which should suffice for an organization who is doing business in telecom domain. That was the goal of creating this particular system. Of course, to foster a system that protects the integrity of telecom products, it may be hardware, software, or services. So as I said, it can be any type of, even in services, it can be any type of service apart from a telecom service per se or telecom product per se. They also went a step ahead. Not only they decided to have the requirements, they went to also create certain measurements which can evaluate that how effectively the QMS is implemented. Now, this is unique to TL 9000. In no other standard which exists except for CMMI, the measurements are there. So, for example, let us say there is a company or rather two companies which are certified to ISO 9001. There is no way of finding out who's better one. But in TL 9000, you can make a comparison. You can benchmark them on quantitatively based on their numerical values of their measurement data. So it's not only somebody else can make out, even the companies themselves can make out that whether they are improving or not, how effective are their quality management systems, and take improvement action. This is unique, as I said, in no other standard it's available. And of course, this leads to the improvement and better customer relationships. One of the other advantages is that the QMS can be seen to be conforming or not conforming based on a particular globally accepted standard. Now, how does it help? It helps that if we are doing the global business, then a company which has implemented TL 9000 or certified to TL 9000, it is very well understood by its customer worldwide as to what it means or what sort of systems the company have. So the acceptance is that much more. It's a two-part system. One is, of course, the requirements, and the requirements which are in every other standard, and second is the measurement portion. So the apart from this, the measurement data is a direct reflection of the reliability of the product and services. Somebody talked about the customer experience of in fact, all measurements, there are 15 of them which are mandatory for certification. But there are another 90 given in the supplemental library, which is available free of cost on the website of TL 9000. Any organization.
I would request you to take another couple of minutes to come to your key points.
Okay, right. So all these measurements are customer centric, and any organization can pick up from there as it suits them. So what does TL 9000 requires? It requires first of all to comply with all the requirements of ISO 9001, as I told. Then there are certain out of adders, there are certain requirements which are applicable to all type of companies who are doing business in telecom domain. Then there are certain requirements which are separately applicable to hardware, software, are those companies which are providing services. So it's not one size fit all. The standard changes from type of company to another type of company. Then there are certain measurements which apply to all type businesses, but certain measurements are specific to hardware companies, software companies, and services companies. So it helps all, and especially the point of supply chain. Now, this is a excellent standard to develop the supply chain of the service providers and bring down
one
the
last,
cost.
you have only 1 more minute left because we have more speakers and others to follow.
Okay, right. So I will just last point of which I like to say is to compare it with another standard called TS 16949, which is for automobile standard. Mr. Malik talked about it. The TS 16949 and TL 9000 are mirror image of each other. In TS 16949, it is ISO 9001 plus certain more requirements as they are applicable to automobile standard. Similarly, in TL 9000, it is ISO 9001 plus certain other requirements which are specially tailor-made for telecom. So, but as TS 16949 has been adopted in the automobile sector, it is not that much in the telecom sector. One of the reasons why automobile sector has flourished is that any car manufacturer, if some MSME or some other organization wants to be their first year supplier, it is mandatory for the supplier to be certified to TS 16949. Otherwise, he cannot become a supplier. This is a stipulation. But it's still not come in TL 9000, simply because the service providers are not uh, uh, making it compulsory. So that brings me to the last, that is the recommendation. So my recommendation is that the TL 9000 should be, it's a global standard. It should be made mandatory, and it can only be driven by either the service providers to their suppliers or in the government sector, rather than specifying the suppliers to be certified to ISO 9001, it should be that they should be certified to TL 9000. And there has to be some more education and awareness about this standard, because as I said, out of worldwide 2000 certification, 500 are in USA, another 500 in China. We compare as just about 60 to 70 certifications in India. So if we want to take on the world, then it is a must that we adopt this, and for that more awareness is needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Colonel Yashpal, for your very passionate and insightful presentation. May I now move over to another veteran of the industry, Mr. Subrat Kumar Mitra, who's Vice President and Head of Government and Industry Relations in Ericsson India, with over 20 plus years of experience in the area of government relations, public policy, government sales, and business development. He strongly believes that digital connectivity and digital communication is a key for India's economic growth. So, Subrat, over to you. Basically, we'd request you to speak about what the role of spectrum in 5G is, what measures should be taken, and how does harmonization help in the growth of the sector and therefore improve the quality and productivity.
Thank you, Balaji. I hope I am audible. Thank you. Thanks to everyone for the opportunity, and thanks to all the speakers before me for making their inputs. Very valuable, very enriching discussion so far. Good afternoon. I am Subrato, and thanks, Balaji, for the kind words. Now, I'll just move on to the spectrum. General Sir has already mentioned about it. Now, I'll just go into a bit detail. See, whenever any new communication technology, a generation is launched, like now we are rolling out 5G around the world, the key to that is actually spectrum. Spectrum is almost like the very oxygen on which this sector lives. And while everyone talks about spectrum, the requirement, there are certain things that we need to ensure, on spectrum. The first is harmonization. When I speak harmonization, it is that after every 4 years, you will hear the World Radio Congress comes to an agreement worldwide on how the spectrum should be utilized, which sector should use what. And the benefit of that is that it helps in the global rollout of the technology. So now it is essential that India actually rolls out 5G in the future, whenever the next generation of technology in those exactly those bands where globally the rollout is happening. What it will benefit India is that we can learn from the learnings from others, and as and when the networks are getting rolled out in the world, and that will help us to deploy our networks much more efficiently, cost effective manner. And the best part is we will not end up repeating the mistakes what others have done. Hence, harmonization to the global spectrum is extremely essential. That's like the prerequisite. It also helps for us to take advantage of the scale both of network equipment and also of the devices, because it helps us to bring down the costs both for operators and eventually for the end. So that's hence the you always hear the industry talk about harmonization. The next aspect is on the quantity of spectrum. Now it's very clear that India, even though we are the second largest telecommunication network in terms of subscribers, you will find that our operators here, when you compare them to their global peers, have less amount of spectrum. And it is to their credit that in despite the low spectrum, you have such high telecom mobile network penetration in the country. And when I'm speaking about spectrum, particularly for India, it becomes extremely critical, because you need to understand that in India, the only network you have is mobile network. We do not have alternates of other networks which are there in other countries, like very deep and fixed wireline network, or a fiber network, a terrestrial, a radio, or a satellite network. In India, mobile network is the only network is there. Hence, all the more important that we need to make sufficient amount of quantity of spectrum available. uh, and then the next aspect of that is quality of spectrum. When I say quality of spectrum, it is that when you give when the state author gives power, makes the spectrum available to the telecom operators, it should ensure that they are able to make full utilization of the spectrum without any additional restrictions in terms of power emission, or in terms of any additional guard bands and others, which again defeats the, or which reduces the efficiency of that utilization. The fourth important aspect is time. You need to make spectrum available when it is right now needed. uh, there is no point in keeping that spectrum unused. And if you give a spectrum, say 5 years or 10 years down the line, when the need is today, possibly the purpose is lost. And the last part is obviously the cost. Others have spoken about it. For any mobile communication system to for early adoption of it, to make it much more easier, affordable. India is already the lowest cost in terms of broadband prices. I think the cost of the spectrum is one thing that needs to be looked. And this all these five fundamental principles applies to both access spectrum and backhaul. And why I'm speaking about this is that even if I look into the 5G, we are globally, what we are seeing, countries are giving 100 megahertz of spectrum, a minimum of 80 to 100 megahertz of spectrum in 3.5 gigahertz. So in India, you need that at least 100 megahertz of contiguous spectrum. That's very important. No point giving spectrum in different blocks. You need to give them a contiguous chunk of 100. And again, a minimum of 400 to almost, we are seeing globally 800 megahertz of spectrum in the millimeter wave band, the 26-28 gigahertz band. And this is just to start the 5G journey. And what we eventually anticipate is that you will need additional 80 to 100 megahertz of again mid-band spectrum, and another 1 to 2 gigahertz of spectrum, high band spectrum, the millimeter wave spectrum, as 5G gets matured in the network. And added to that, you also need sufficient amount of spectrum in already the existing bands. We are Government is taken measures. The telecom industry came together to ensure that harmonization has taken place inside, and that spectrum is coming available. But we need to fix this, because in order to realize the potential of digital society, including use cases like public security, IoT, industry automation, all that we have heard, additional spectrum band and enough bandwidths are needed, both for the existing existing 4G, upcoming 5G, and any future things where we are hearing about others. And the affordable and pervasive services and applications actually build on economies of scale, and that's the reason we need the spectrum to be made available. Now, I will move on to the next part, which is on the backhaul. uh, Backhaul, we have identified the spectrum, which we already have the traditional microwave. We are also looking at E and V band. In India, we all are aware of the difficulty of rolling out fiber for backhaul. It's extremely expensive. There is no protection of fiber, very high right of way costs and others. If the and There has been a demand, if the E band and the V band is made available to the telecom network, it will help the sector to roll out massive backhaul using this spectrum, and the eventual beneficiary of that is actually going to be the end consumers who are going to benefit of that. Um, then I will
Subrat, you
also
may have to wind down in about a minute
Yes,
or so.
yes. The last point, I'll move on to the standards. See, the telecommunication industry globally is driven, works around this 3GPP and other standards. And while we hear a lot of, inputs given, just to give you certain benchmark, the technology of whether it is 3G, 4G, or 5G have been the fastest, spreading technologies. There are many data which today shows that, for example, when you compare health services availability around the world, this is World Bank and IMF data. 69% of the world population has access to health services, whereas more than 81% of world population has access to 4G and LTE. And there is one more interesting data. There are almost 5.2 billion unique mobile phone users in the world, where only around 3.2 billion toothbrushes are sold annually. So the standards have ensured that the telecom technology has become all pervasive, and it is there, and it is this issues of spectrum availability will actually help in the further improving the quality and affordability part for the end consumer. Thank you, Balaji.
Thank you so much, Subrat. Good perspectives and practicing managers' perspective as well. So, really, thank you for that. I now move on to Mr. Jiten Balakrishnan, who's the CTO of Connectivity Solutions at STL. He is a BTech from IIT Madras and a PhD from Cornell. And with his experience in optical fiber and digital connectivity space, he's a thought leader in the telecoms industry. So, Jitin, for you, Sterlite Technology is obviously working very closely and one of the key players in creating digital infrastructure in the country. So, your views on what ought to be done in terms of improving quality and standards to ensure world-class digital infrastructure in the country, and what is it that your company is doing, and what would you expect the government to take actions on? Over to you.
Thanks, Balaji, and thank you for organizing this forum. This has been very, very informative, and it's a privilege to participate on this. This is also, like, I feel like an important initiative because it lies pretty much at the heart of our economic growth in for the next 2 decades or more. So I represent STL, and we are one of the largest optical fiber and cable companies worldwide, and we are definitely the largest in India. And we build digital networks. So we manufacture optical fiber and cable, and we're proud to say that in India we have homegrown technology which leads the world in innovation in this area. We deploy networks in India for the government, for defense, for some of the private carriers, and we've done this from like the north and Kashmir and snow and down to the heat and the deserts, all across the country, both for the defense networks and for the BharatNet. We are involved with that. And we also work in the wireless hardware and software space, like programmable FTTX. And we're doing this not just in India, but we're a major player in Europe and other parts of the world as well. And what I would like to share is our experience in knowing how networks are deployed in other parts of the world. What are the best practices over there, and how do we bring some of that into India and focus along this whole idea of like how we could think about it from the quality perspective. So we often hear about how 5G spectrum, data connectivity, all of this is exploding, and that this is definitely an area that we should be taking a lead on, and definitely in terms of quality, security, etc. Sri Mitra just mentioned this just a few minutes ago. But while we usually focus on the wireless part of the network, it is equally important to focus on the backbone of the communication, which is optical fiber. This network is broadly made up of three elements. One is the intercity long distance network, which connects major routes of the country. I mean, these links could be anywhere between a few tens of kilometers to much longer. Then you have intra-city metro and access networks, which basically distribute the data to various places. Tower fiberization becomes a very important role, a point over here, which has been mentioned before. And then finally, you have the edge networks, which is where FTTH fits in. And with 5G coming in, the spectrum is getting taken, like the wireless spectrum has to be deployed at the edge, because the range of 5G transponders is much smaller than the 4G, and so this is where 5G and FTTH convergence is actually a very hot topic today. So this is where we'd like to point out that backhaul is where fiber is key, and wireless backhaul is complementary to it. Pretty much all mobile data today goes through fiber, and in fact, we are sitting and having this particular exchange on this forum because there's fiber deployed all over the place. Right? This is the basis of high-speed connectivity in numerous segments. Initiatives like BharatNet, which basically take this connectivity to every village in the country. This is a fiberization effort. We have large enterprise customers who are driving massive amounts of data. Industry 4.0, IoT, which is driving productivity. Dr. Vinesh James talked about this in his presentation just a little while ago. And then finally, you have you and me. We are sitting here and talking on this forum thanks to this data connectivity. So when we focus on the passive network, this is where I'd like to make the first of 3 points. The first is that we need to account for the unique way in which this network is deployed, which is for the long term. Lieutenant General Kochhar mentioned the backhaul fiberization, and we fully agree with what he said. And unlike the more fast-changing standards in wireless, where you have these generations which last 10 years or less, when you're going from 4G to 5G, and Wi-Fi and everything that's moving, the optical fiber network has to be deployed for about 25, 30 years. And this is a real challenge. And it's even more of a challenge in a dynamic landscape like India. When you actually look at the deployment of networks, of course, there is a challenge which we have in terms of right of way, etc. This might be a little bit out of the scope of what we're talking about today, but that's an important part to take note of as to how we actually provision optical networks. If we do it as a utility, it'll be a valuable thing, but that's a little out of today's scope. But when you have a deployed network, the rate at which networks get cut, or like you have to restore it, repair it, it's a real challenge, and we know it firsthand. So what we need to do is to utilize, the first point I want to make is that we need to utilize technology that looks forward for the next 25 to 30 years, and not continue to use the same kind of technology that we have been doing for the last 30 years. Now, the current fiber that is deployed for the majority of the networks today has been in place for probably about 30 to 40 years. And very little has changed in its abilities. Now, going forward, when you're talking about, for example, for a network cut, if you use that fiber, we know that your network is not going to last more than 5 to 10 years, because after that point, you're basically going to have no ability for the network to transmit signal anymore because of the splice losses and so on that are going to come on. This is where things like bent and sensitive fiber become critical, and there have been barriers to this, but we have developed the technology here in India, and we are pretty much a thought leader in the space today, and we have access to it. And I think it's critical to understand how fiber impacts the life of network, how do you make it last 30 years, and how this can be deployed even in networks like BharatNet, etc., which will take us forward for a long time. Along with that, we also have the challenge of fiberization. Usually we deploy a very low count of fiber because there has been a traditional model of how we think about network architectures. I just described that very briefly: core networks, metro networks, edge networks. But the other thing is that, like, what's happening is that all of these network architectures are all converging today in ways that we are just beginning to see. So fiberization and adding fiber count will enable us to future-proof these networks. So these are the two things, and from a technology perspective, that we need to focus on, which will really, really impact the quality of your network for a very long time. You have one shot to do this, and we need to do it right today. So the second area that I want to talk about is
We'll have to wind up in about a couple of minutes, Jiten.
Sure, I'll do that. The second area, I'll just speed through this, is to think about what products enter our networks today. Srimati Deepak Tyagi talked about the needs of standards and quality. We really need to be appreciative of the work that TEC, DOT have been doing on this. And again, what Mr. Malik said about not saving on pennies to suffer later. We need to think about how to deploy the right quality of products. It increases the cost of a network by a couple of %, but it changes your lifetime completely. We need to have standards in place for optical fiber, for cable, for preforms, in addition to passive connectivity, just speaking about this sector. The last point I want to make is the testing and enforcement of these standards. This is an important regulatory function. Lieutenant Colonel Yashpal, Sri Vadalkar, Sri Vyas, all of them talked about it today. And we need to have mandatory testing about many of the products that we're seeing in this area. We need to invest in this. The industry is capable. We are capable of it for sure. We do it for our own products. And various government labs are capable of this. And this is where standards bodies, regulatory bodies can take the lead along with the partners in the industry. Just to summarize, we need to focus heavily on the quality of a backbone network such that it serves our need for the next 3 decades. And we need to get the right technologies. We need to implement standards for the products that we need to use, and we need to enforce the testing and the standards. If we do this well, we will all benefit, and I'm sure we're going to be at the cutting edge for a long while forward. So thanks for, and that's pretty much what I had to say about like what our view was in Sterlite. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jitendra. I think very, very valid perspectives, and those 3 recommendations you gave definitely food for thought and action, actually more than thought. With this, we have the fortune to have our last panelist to come on and give his perspectives on the topic. This is Mr. Anupam Agarwal, who is the chair of the India Internet Foundation, so an important position that he holds. He's an IT practitioner, and he has leadership experience in IT public policy, in corporate industry forums, information technology standards, and program implementation. He's also a specialist in the corporate industry forums and standard cell at TCS. So, Anupam, I think the question to you is, given that for telecom services, what is the role that internet standards play, and what is India's engagement in these SDOs? And what is your view in terms of what can be a potential roadmap for increased participation of India in this entire process? Over to you.
Yeah, Balaji, thanks. So sitting quiet for so long time, I literally forgot that I am a speaker. So, but the question which you have posed, Balaji, is absolutely relevant in the context of what we are discussing as part of this Udyog Manthan. So thanks to QCI and Ministry for organizing this. So when we talk about internet, internet has been the cornerstone for making people feel normal in last year, in the view of pandemic, where the world was anything but normal. But this is only true for the people who had access to the internet. Imagine the people who did not have access to internet, what this pandemic would have meant for them. Now, when on top of that, when Prime Minister Modi talks about Atmanirbhar Bharat, I think access to internet should be there. With what he is talking about is that internet should be accessible to everyone. Now, most of the content, while it may appear that it is there in local language, the domain name system is still not in the local language. So what we are going to see in the future is a multilingual internet. So are we ready for that kind of internet which is going to be in 15 or 20 different languages of India? Now, if we are talking about internet, and if we take this technical side, it is very important that we take into account that DNS is completely secure, so that a stable and robust internet is something which is provided to the users. Now, just for taking an example, most of the internet which works in India, for which we heard that fiber is very important, uh, submarine cable landing stations at Chennai and Mumbai are also a very key piece of critical internet infrastructure. And for some reason, if there is a disaster at that end, the DNS in India, the way currently it is configured, internet is only going to work for normally 7 days. So what is our preparation for that? And it can only happen if we take internet standardizations very, very critically and make it as part of the overall mainstream standardization, which we are talking as part of Industry 4.0, TL 9000, ISO 9000, whatever we are talking here. But the fact is that most of these internet standards are not developed as part of the organizations which we are talking about. It is done by W3C, it is done by Internet Engineering Task Force, which are different SDOs, and it is very important for India at this stage to start participating in this SDOs, because there are two things critically which are going to change in the future. One, the edge is going to be virtualized, because if we are talking about 5G, then the content will have to be pushed towards the edge, which means in the future we are going to see very small micro data center kind of stuff, and then the internet is going to be multilingual. So with these two key technology change from the user side, which we are going to see, it is important that we start participating not only the SDOs which are for telecoms, but also in the SDOs which are working on the internet. Now, there are very key constraints in the participation and implementation of the standards what we are talking about. First of all, as Mr. Kocher said, that the black backhaul is choking. 5G is not going to change it. So there are standards related to that which are developed elsewhere, and we need to start participating there. Uh, but the standard development is something which requires a high level of expertise, and that is where the challenge is. Traditionally, what has happened is that we have adopted whatever standards has been developed elsewhere in the world. Whether it is 9000, we have adopted in India. If it is TL 9000, we have adopted in India. But what happens for the Indian use case? If the use case is mine, then the standard should be developed as per my requirements, and that is the key piece which we are missing here. In this entire debate, I think if the use case is for India, we need to make our own standards, and that requires a high level of expertise, which may not be possible for a lot of small and medium sector organizations, because standard development is a long term affair. It takes normally 2.5 years to develop one piece of standard. So it may not be in the business plan of lot many organizations to develop standards, and that is where a key focus is required. Since a lot of CTOs are present in this panel, I would strongly urge them to make standards participation as one of the KPIs or KRAs of their key technical people. And that is only when our use case is going to be will get reflected in the standardization. The second is in terms of implementation. Uh, we are a member of 3GPP. We take 3GPP and deploy it. Fantastic, because that is the market requirement. But what happens when there is a big change in the TCP/IP protocol? If you look at the recent proposal of China in ITU, they are talking about a completely new set of IP networking requirements, which is going to have a huge implication on the entire telecom sector. But this discussion is primarily happening in ITF. So there is again a requirement to participate in some other standard developing organizations. It can be IEEE, uh, it can be your IETF, but it can be W3C. But we need to also look at where the standards development is primarily happening. So to sum it up, to sum the entire thing, I think standards participation broadly is a very high expertise role, and there has to be a systemic way of recognizing the experts who are contributing towards standards development. Second, if we are participating in the standards development, this particular area is aligned with the national interest. This dimension is completely missing. We are talking standardization with respect to only the business development, but there is a national interest alignment as well. That debate needs to come in the front. And because for a lot of small and medium enterprises, reporting time for standards development is an issue. While all these companies are members of some business association, I think one of the key changes which we can do in terms of standards development is making these industry bodies as standard developing organizations in India, and that will be my one of the recommendations. And finally, the key piece which we see missing in the standard development is that academia is completely not interested in standard development, because at some level it is also thought that standardization inhibits innovation. So if you are innovating something, you are not someone who is to be seen with standardization, and that is the core belief why we see that standardization is not one of the key activities in India, while in the same field we see a huge amount of academia participation in Europe and US. So to sum it up, I think people who are participating in standards should be recognized systematically. We should encourage academia participation in the standards developing organizations, and then we may want to recognize some of the industry bodies as the SDOs of the future, and articulate the national interest with the standardization, uh, and bring in IETF and W3C and other SDOs which are creating very impactful standards for the future as part of the entire standardization framework. Thank you, Balaji.
Thank you so much, Anupam. I think you brought in the perspective of small and medium enterprises, the role of standardization in nation building and so on, importance of academia, excellent points which were not covered. I guess in a way, all the participants would acknowledge, and I've learned a lot today just being a moderator on this panel, because we've covered so much of ground in the context of the opportunities and challenges and quality and productivity as it pertains to communication services. And frankly, the space that we covered was so vast and wide, from today till tomorrow, services from the user perspective, technology, standards, and Deepaji, as she said, this would be a manthan. And truly, I think we've ended up creating a lot of exciting thoughts, which will then translate into action, I'm sure, in the days and weeks to come. And I would not even attempt to summarize as a moderator all that has been said. I'm sure each of you would have taken your own points. I picked up a few which I've noted down for myself. And therefore, without much ado, I will hand this back to the organizers to take and conclude this session.
Thank you. This indeed has been an enriching manthan, which has touched upon the various aspects in the communication services sector. There have been several deep insights and recommendations in today's manthan that will be compiled into a compendium that would help to strengthen the communication services sector in the country and will significantly contribute to our Prime Minister's vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat. On behalf of DPIIT and QCI, I would now like to conclude today's session by thanking Srimati Deepa Tyagiji for setting up the context for today's manthan. Our sincere thanks to Ms. Sangeeta Saxena ma'am, Director DOC, for her valuable support and guidance. I also want to thank our moderator and esteemed speakers for such a meaningful deliberation today. Thank you, sir. Thank you to all our partners. Please pardon me for not taking the names, and as the list is very long, and QCI team for their hard work. And last but not the least, our wonderful audience. Thank you all. Namaste. Shukriya.
Thank you very
Be
much.
safe. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.